on, you bastard!
Brought to you by supporters who probably have better taste than this schmuck.
I miss light piping. I miss it a lot. Sure, it hasn't gone away really. There are still figures that utilize this technique in modern toy lines, but it's far from widespread anymore. To a point, I get it. It's a pretty expensive thing to do, especially with requiring a separate clear plastic sprue, one that could probably be used for something else. A good chunk of the community hates it these days as well, as if done improperly, the eyes can look deader than my ability to not feel guilty when good things happen. Painted eyes cater better to display-oriented collectors, so I fully understand. Nevertheless, I can't help but miss the days when I'd hold a figure up to the light and the face sculpt would just explode in character. When it's done well, it's a far from intrusive and a gorgeous gimmick. And for that, I'd love to see it on a bunch of other figures. The best examples don't even need an LED behind it, they just work right out the gates. And it's a joyous sight to see. So even though it's not something that's gone completely, I still lament its de-emphasis. Not every figure needs to be perfect standing in an A stance on a shelf. Sometimes they can really benefit from some simple play features like this. I miss features like this, and really, I miss light piping. I miss it a lot. Recently I bought a junker Cybertron Optimus Prime to salvage the ears for my Galaxy Force version, which there should be a brand new full review up for today. Thing is, before I sell this off for less than the price of lunch, I thought it'd be cool to compare this to my Takara edition, at least as much as I'm able to show without accessories. Aside from the differences in sound chip languages, not that either of my copies work anyway, the first difference is with the face. Takara has extra paint on the temple of the nose guard, Hasbro doesn't. The leg guns on the Hasbro versions aren't painted as comprehensively when compared to Takara. Hasbro has segmented kneecaps. Takara has fully painted ones. Takara has paint on both sides of the cannons. Hasbro only has it on one side. Hasbro has clips on the wings, while Takara pins them for a more sturdy fit. Hasbro didn't bother painting the back wheels, whereas Takara did. Takara also adds an extra 2 yellow top lights, whereas Hasbro skipped them until the red and black version later. And finally, the Cyber Key has a full gold border around it, whereas Hasbro is just transparent blue. The matrices are the same though. Honestly, you can go for either. Both are peaks, so whatever you end up with, you're getting something brilliant. Yo, G1ers, wife bad jokes aren't funny. If you spent any time in the Transformers community outside of YouTube, you've likely come across some of these painfully unfunny, dismissive, and in some cases downright misogynistic memes about how relationships are slowly falling apart because of the spouse's unwillingness to accept the Transformers hobby. Maybe it'd be ignorable if it was a one-off here and there, but it's constant, over and over, and it's been like this for decades. Beyond just being painfully unfunny, it's honestly kinda sad. If your partner is being critical of your collecting habits, you've got one of two problems. Either it's not an issue and you need to set boundaries in the relationship, so it's a communication problem, or you genuinely do have an issue and your partner is trying to make you realize that. In that instance, it's a hoarding issue, something you need to fix. I'm not saying you can't joke about issues. Hell, the amount of jokes I've made at the expense of my mental health is staggering. But when it's the only common joke I see coming out of the older community outside of hot rod slander and RC fetishization, you can see there's a problem here. Communicate with your partner, discuss things, confide in them. Let me put it this way, all of my local G1er friends, actual G1ers, not the whingers you'd find on the internet, they all have healthy relationships and don't whinge about their wives on the internet. Maybe that's kinda saying something. It's the 40th anniversary of the franchise, but really, you might as well call it the year of G1 Optimus Prime. I get it's the perfect way to homage what's come before, but I'ma be real, this is excessive. I mean, on the Hasbro side of things, you got Studio Series 86, the mainline deluxe, a reissue of the Earthrise leader, and a reissue of the G1 toy in 2 inaccurate colors. Then you bring in Takara into the mix, and you've got 2 missing links, the Karakuri transforming statue, MP44S, and the 2 MP Jinrais across normal and Gutai masterpiece, which sure aren't canonically Optimus Prime, but functionally absolutely are. Then there's the licensed stuff. You've got 2 Hot Wheels Optimus Primes with a third on the way, 3 different YOLO Park outings, and the Blockies version, with a chase variant and a toy style one later down the track. What's that? 19 Primes? Absolutely no shade on these releases. I haven't come across one that I would call bad by any means. But even by anniversary standards, you have to admit it's a bit much. And I'm sure I've missed a couple, especially in the licensed third-party space. Christ, it's hard to keep up with everything. I shudder to think of the person who wants to collect every single one. God damn it, I f***ed up. Last week, I put out a short covering what I assumed were all the G1 Optimus Primes releasing this year. But apparently, I missed a few. And I thought it was excessive back then. Hell. We've also got Takara's Dramatic Capture, a redeco from a 3-pack that turns the Earthrise mold into a more tune-accurate affair. Cool, I guess, but why not just get the SS86 version? Turns out I missed a couple with Blockies as well. The toy style has its own chase variants, and there's a more premium version of the original on top of that. I mean, Blockies are quite lovely, but does a lot of primes. Furthermore, technically LEGO Prime is still in production. It never actually stopped since 2022. Still a killer set, by the way. But perhaps the weirdest choice is a reissue of the Power of the Primes version. I mean, seriously, what? Don't get me wrong, it's a good mold and it sort of lines up with the release of Transformers 1. But of all the molds to re-release, seriously? This one? And ultimately, that puts us at 24 G1 Optimus Primes. Again, to reiterate, none of these are bad, and it makes sense given the anniversary of the franchise. But at some point, you have to ask, shouldn't you have given it a rest maybe 5 primes in? So, 2024 is finally over, and it's been a wonderful celebratory year. But the question remains, did I actually cover every G1 Optimus Prime they did? Unfortunately, no, I did not. As well as the previous 2 doc takes I did on this, SS86 got its own special edition at Cybertron Con 2024, with an exclusive sticker sheet. Cool, it exists, but you can get the same effect through toy hacks. For some bizarre reason, Siege Prime got a reissue in some markets, primarily Europe and the UK. Not sure why, both Earthrise and Power of the Primes also came back, but whatever. And to cap it all off, Blockies made their own special series of small-scale chibi releases, with 4 more Optimus Primes. I love Blockies, but this is too much. In fact, this is all too much, with 30 G1 Optimus Primes released in 2024! It's like Thrilling 30, only just G1 Optimus Prime. And that's just strictly Generation 1. If you start expanding to characters who share the same design or G1 adjacent things, or even removing the qualifier entirely, who knows how many there are? At least we can ease off a bit the next year, I hope. Star Convoy doesn't count. For years, the fans have lamented the loss of Transformers Animated, doubly so with the semi-recent passing of Derek J. Wyatt. But the beautiful thing about the community is the love that lives on in the hearts of those the series touched. Case in point, this fan comic, spearheaded by TFA historian Kean Carlisle, the gentleman who couldn't find anything to say about Kingdom Warpath. Conceptually, it's a fairly simple story, a nice re-entry into the world of Transformers Animated that doesn't need to push the story forward to fulfill on lost promises. It's here to remind you of the best of the series, and I mean that as an absolute compliment. It's not trying to be anything grandiose, but rather it takes an unused concept from Derek's sketches and runs with it. You can really imagine something like this being done on TV as a one-off, perhaps with a tie-in toy gimmick. You're instantly transported back to the weekly adventures of the show, with writing that expertly revitalizes the characters. Legit, I was reading these lines in the characters' voices, not that you'll need to if you purchase the voice-dubbed version. However, if it's below your budget, as awesome as the voiced version is, it's still brilliant regardless. Even if it eventually becomes lost media, the print comic itself stands alone as a wonderful one-shot. From the release strategy, to the writing, to the gorgeous artwork, oh hi Jito, it's a wonderful love letter to everything animated was, as well as embodying the spirit of Derek J. Wyatt wholeheartedly.
The characters are really good. Like, they'll grow on you. Sentinel Prime is fantastic. I think it was the highlight for me.
John Hamm's always good.
He was so good. I love Sentinel as the bad guy. It was great.
It's nice to see a villain that just doesn't, you know, try to be sympathetic or doesn't try to be a twist villain.
It's just an
I guess he is technically a twist villain. Oh wait, that's spoilers.
Yeah, I was about to think, are we spoiling that? I don't know. I mean, it's...
Yeah, they haven't actually mentioned it in the trailer.
Nah, I mean, it's Sentinel Prime. He's always a dickhead. When has Sentinel Prime ever been a good person?
Actually, let's cut this whole section out because this isn't going to work.
Damn it.
I think the final wave of Legacy is one of the best things for collecting Hasbro has ever done. For those not in the loop, Legacy United's close consists of a large chunk of reissued hard-to-get figures, as well as a few random redecos that wouldn't really fly at retail otherwise. Now, to be honest, I own pretty much all of these, so the majority I can just skip. But even so, conceptually, I love it! The vast majority of these figures have been scalped to absolute oblivion, whether they were actually exclusives or not. I was lucky enough to get a Cosmos, and I adore him to bits, but most people, not so much. To see these figures back on shelves, especially for newer collectors who weren't around when they first dropped, is genuinely awesome. Anyone complaining, how dare they ruin the aftermarket? Bro, they're toys, not investments. Go take back shots from the stock market if you want to make money. And you know what? It's kinda nice having a wave where you don't have to buy much in it for a change. Sure, I probably have swapped G2 Breakdown with the normal version, as it's still very hard to come by, but I still love this idea and hope it gets done at the end of the next line too. I'm sure there'll be plenty of people who find nothing in this to enjoy and maybe curmudgeonly grumble that this should never happen again, but genuinely, I think the final wave of Legacy is one of the best things for collecting Hasbro has ever done. At the time of recording, Walmart has sort of just dropped 2 new listings for their upcoming retro-inspired line, but today I'm not particularly focusing on what we can see. I mean, what else is there to say other than I already dislike the Netflix B molds? They should have retooled the face, and I'll need to see some proper side-by-side comparisons of Brawn before I make a decision, because I already really like the base molds. No, today I'd like to focus on something I think Hasbro should do. Remember how they basically rushed the final Velocitron collection wave to market, leaving Hot Rod unreleased? A lot of people still really want that Hot Rod, and it would be piss easy. The exclusivity license is to the same store, so there wouldn't be any legal red tape, the theming is on point, and if the figure hasn't been produced already, simply requiring repacking in the same vein as the Reactivate stuff, it's not like the mold is being used for anything else at the moment. Side note, that's probably why they used the Netflix mold for Bumblebee, not the 86 one. And to make it clear, I do not give a shit about this release personally. Not gonna lie, I kinda hate this mold and what it represents, with the exception of Shattered Glass, but it's not about me. People want this release, they have since it leaked years ago. I just think those fans deserve what they've been asking for. It's something easy to do, and Hasbro would be missing out big time if they didn't. I found a lot of people getting confused by my stance on screen accuracy. Sometimes I compliment it, and other times I despise its inclusion. Might seem inconsistent, but I've always had an internal logic towards the concept. It's just been so long since it's been brought up that it's faded from memory, so allow me to reiterate. At least when it comes to me, accuracy is neither a positive nor a negative. It is simply an aesthetic choice, and whether something turns out good or bad is wholly separate from that. I've seen fantastic figures that are accurate, abysmal figures that are accurate, fantastic figures that do their own thing, and abysmal figures that do their own thing. This does cause a lot of confusion, as accuracy fans see me flop about, and fans who hate screen models see the same. But as someone who doesn't believe in objectivity with reviewing figures, as everyone's stance will be different and equally valid, it's just how I see it. I'm always going to be honest with how I find a figure looks. It's just that accuracy doesn't usually register on that scale. Sometimes it can explain why something looks good, or why it looks bad, or why they did what they did, but to me, just give me good toys. That's enough on my end. Siege was a fresh new start for a lot of those classic G1 characters. No more were we saddled with that weird, inconsistent Prime Wars trilogy aesthetic, we were getting something grounded and purposeful. With so many cool figures right out the gate, why did they have to ruin Megatron? This isn't a bad figure by any means, but dear god, it's so boring. The engineering works, as does the sculpting. Everything is there to deliver a solid figure, but it's really let down by its deco. Thankfully, we're not dealing with Games Workshop Grey, but it feels like they wanted to do a G1-styled Megatron without actually giving it the effort required. Compared to most of the other Siege figures, it just doesn't stand out. Of course, it would get fixed later, but for at least a year, this was the only Megatron some people had, unless you'd gone with the Titans Return version. And yeah, I'm gonna say it, Titans Return did it better. Maybe lacking in articulation, but it's just a better toy, even able to overcome its lackluster deco. Perhaps if Siege Megatron was bolder, it could have done the same, but it's a simpler Voyager with almost a deluxe class level transformation. As such, it just doesn't cut it. Easily forgotten in the end, until they do an 86 version that turns into a realistic tank that isn't the Earthrise one. You know it's coming, it's going to be reality in due time. A lot of Generations toys follow the mantra of just being G1 but with articulation, and sometimes that does work. When the G1 original is so iconic, so brilliant, you don't particularly need to do a lot to quote-unquote fix it. However, it's important to note that not all G1 toys were created equally. There's a clear change in design philosophy pre- and post-movie. While many collectors erroneously claim Takara jumped ship in 1986, they never actually stopped. It's just that the toy stopped being conceptualized in Japan, instead finding their genesis at Floro Dairy and being produced in Japan soon after. It's because of this that a lot of G1 collectors put a distinction between the two eras of toys, and some people choose not to collect that era entirely. It's for this reason that a lot of the really good 86 onwards updates don't stick super closely to the source material. There were a lot of growing pains in that era, and it doesn't make one-to-one updates that successfully usually. Wreck Gar isn't a bad toy by any means, but since release I've always gotten the feeling of white noise from him. The robo mode is accurate and well crafted, showing some of Takashi Kunihiro's strengths in proportional blocking, but I always felt there was something off in the figure's construction. It's just on the edge of dense, and something about the posing never quite led it to a dynamicism I was hoping for. Even the ab crunch doesn't do anything for the design. It doesn't fail at posing, but it's not a toy designed to do really well in dynamic stances. It's designed to remain in a static A stance on a shelf along with the rest of the crew. That is a valid way to collect, but it's at complete odds with what I look for in a toy. What really kills it for me is the bike mode though. This is just flat out unfinished. Getting here is a chore as is it's easy to forget the finicky order of operations in the torso, but even in its final form, it's just a gappy mess. Nothing flows together, it's a bunch of limbs not being convincing at all. The entire back section doesn't even have a bunch of tabs that I feel it really should have, which is something I know a lot of people don't care about, but it is something that bugs me a lot. I love when figures fit together super solidly and nice and weighty, and as the antithesis of that, nah, I don't vibe with this. And the thing that frustrates me is, that's okay for most collectors. It recreates exactly what the G1 toy did in all its benefits and shortcomings. The conversion is identical, the accuracy is on point, and it opens itself up to a gazillion retools that all have a lot of effort put into them. Retools that have all sold reasonably well. Not gangbusters, but far from shelf warmers, otherwise they wouldn't have made so many. I can't call this a bad toy, or even a lazy one, but it's just not one that fits my sensibilities. You'll never see it on any of the worst of year lists, but it just does nothing I look for. I don't hate this thing, but it's clear its priorities are at complete odds with what I collect, and it is most certainly not the kind of toy for me. If you are the kind of collector who looks for perfect accuracy, scale, and full line representation, this is the perfect toy for you. But for me, nah, I'm good with the RTS molds. This isn't a swing and a miss, but it did miss me, and I guess sometimes that's alright. So after months of waiting and messing with friends' copies, I was finally able to track down a copy of SS86 Optimus Prime. And yes, he is just as good as I expected him to be, but, oh, I guess he's been misassembled. Yeah, this is quite a common factory error, but it's not something too difficult to fix. Still, it's far from the first time a figure has been marred by incorrect assembly. Combiner Wars Onslaught had this issue where the knee pieces were attached backwards, causing the tab to stress the plastic when going into vehicle mode. Fixing it was a real pain in the arse. Concept Art Sunstreaker usually has his leg gibble clips on backwards, which doesn't affect the transformation that much, but it does make you wonder, why? Dungeon Tone Cup has the panels attached backwards, so the mechanical detail doesn't line up. Dear God, why? Kingdom Galvatron's first run had the shoulders backwards, which was a non-issue if you didn't mind the pins facing forwards. Masterpiece Cyanide initially had misassembled shoulders before they were fixed on ratchets. And these are just a few examples I can verify and find evidence of. There's countless others out there. Thing is though, all these figures are still thought of fondly to this day, despite their factory errors. The fact they were able to overcome such blunders goes to show Hashtag know how to make good shit. The idea of swapping out when it comes to collecting isn't something I typically subscribe to. For me, each toy represents its own unique experience, one that I love to come back to and experience again at another day. It takes me back to that time, re-engages with the engineering ideologies of the era. Because of this, picking my favourite of a specific character can be very difficult. If I love a bunch of figures of the same character, why would I rank and order them in a specific way? Weirdly, I don't feel that way for specific G1 Optimus Primes. Not G1 adjacent, that gets somewhat difficult, but for those specific stylings, there's one that always stands out to me. Classics Optimus Prime, for me, is what I imagine Prime would be if G1 continued into the modern era, as if he'd lived, experimented, and finally landed on a presentation he really liked. It's as if he's built himself into the perfect version of himself, and it's sort of awe-inspiring. I sadly never had this mold as a kid. None of the toy stores I frequented ever stocked any, and even then, I only ever had cash for Legends. Not that I regret that circumstance, as Legends are awesome. As a result, though, he was probably one of my first ever grails, though getting him was pretty anticlimactic. This one's actually one of the Age of Extinction versions, with a hefty layering of customizing laid on top. But I love him all the same. The head is possibly one of the best Optimus Prime head sculpts they've ever done, combining G1 meanness with an awesome angular crown. The splaying out is very subtle, but it does so much for the silhouettes. It's unmistakably Classics Prime, it's just so him. The torso is mean as fuck, especially when you pick out the windows. It angles in and out in the perfect ways that emphasize the anime proportions. In fact, the angling really is what makes this guy. Like, these shoulders are something else. It's sort of like the missing link between G1 and the Unicron trilogy, which I guess is fitting as he came out at the tail end of that engineering style in 2006. Not gonna lie, I kinda fuck with this arm kibble. A lot of older Transformers, specifically from 2001 to 2014, did some really clever things with arm kibble. Once Prime Wars came around though, they kinda just stopped. Arm kibble stopped being a thing, and I really miss it. For all the complaints I've seen about these arms, they really make the design, along with a bunch of other awesome design quirks. I've seen a KO that removes them, and it just isn't the same. Wearing the kibble loud and proud, making a statement, that's what it's all about. The articulation honestly tangos with the best of modern toys, with pretty much everything you could want outside of wrists and ankles. Though I've gone and fixed the latter. Rest in peace, Shapeways. It feels like watching the Library of Alexandria burn. The guns are also great, forming from parts of the alt mode. Nowadays, you wouldn't hear the end of it with how they aren't G1 accurate, but back in the day, this was one of the coolest gimmicks ever, and a big part of why Kid Me wanted this figure initially. The transformation is just buttery smooth. It's one of the figures that really laid the groundwork for how modern Optimus Primes could work, along with MPO-1. Maybe part of its simplicity comes down to it originally being planned as a deluxe, just upscaled and given a waist swivel for the final version. Not gonna lie, while I'm glad it's a Voyager, it would have absolutely demolished what we ended up getting at that scale. Regardless, it's the perfect intersection of realistic alt mode and early 2000s chunkitude in this mode. Not only does it look fantastic with very good panel management and awesome aerodynamicism, but it feels weighty. It's the sort of density you just don't get with figures anymore, outside of Commanders, really. Not to say I don't like the more streamlined, clean, focused style of modern figures, but there's just something special about certain releases from the Classics period. The rhomboid windows, curved panels on the side, the smokestack assembly. It's all things that make it stand out in a way figures these days don't tend to. And sure, this does rely on parts forming pieces, but the way they integrate is so clever, and I wished we'd see more stuff like it. Classics Prime is, well, a classic. There's a reason a select group of fans keep coming back to it. These days, the various upgrade kits that existed in the peripheral have been forgotten, and most of the redecos outside of the really obscure and expensive ones have fallen out of public consciousness. But Classics Prime himself is not loved by everyone, but those that do hold him close and see him as peak Transformers. I still love Earthrise. It's a fantastic figure that used its budget as good as it could. I still love SS86. It's a marvel of engineering that does amazing things. Shitting on the masterpiece, I'd argue. I still love Deluxe Prime, scaling down the G1 Classic in a uniquely fun way. I still love MP10. It's MP10. It's like one of the best Transformers of all time. But for G1 Optimus Primes, there's nothing quite like Classics. Nothing quite on this level of self-realization and aesthetic maturity. It's a figure that makes me want to be the best version of myself I can be, whatever form that may take. And as far as Optimus Primes go, this might just be the best G1 styled form they've ever done. We definitely need a new name for specifying the current run of Generations. See, when Generations first started out, the community collectively decided on the acronym CHUG, standing for Classics, Henkei, Universe, and Generations. However, as we've gone through the years, different eras of CHUG have come about. And with that, I've been thinking, what do we call the current era? There's a very clear synergy between the War for Cybertron trilogy, Studio Series 86, Legacy trilogy, and various tangential micro toy lines. If we just refer to them as CHUG, doesn't that also include all the old stuff as well? Shouldn't we have a specific word for just this particular era of Generations? I have a suggestion. Introducing Unification Era. Firstly, you got the fact that it refers to the unified aesthetic across these toy lines. There is some deviation between them, but for the most part, they're designed to fit together. And secondly, it refers to the brand unification between Hasbro and Takara, which took place right before the era began, likely putting this new age into motion. No, not that new age. I just think it's a quick way, and it's different enough so it doesn't get confused with the toy line Legacy United. And hey, it's better than clumping a bunch of letters together, too damn many at this point. I don't know, I think it's a pretty succinct way to refer to this specific era, and at the very least, you have to acknowledge we definitely need a new name for specifying the current run of Generations. With the semi-recent announcements of Studio Series 86 Devastator and Age of the Prime Superion, I'm seeing a lot of nostalgia for the Combiner Wars era of toys. Admittedly, I'm also feeling a little nostalgic for that period, maybe because it was a simpler time of my life. Looking back, yeah, there are definitely things that could have been done better. Basically, every deluxe having the same conversion scheme wasn't very interesting. Fine for those who display their figures, but for folks like myself who live for the tactile experience, a lot of it felt stale. The approximations were somewhat annoying. Some of them were cooler than the originals, but more often than not, they were just actively worse and mere cost-cutting. Unlike the more refined Unification era aesthetic, frequently the designs would be inconsistent with themselves. Substitutions of the characters in existing molds instead of purposeful redesigns or reasonably accurate recreations. Stability was a big thing. If your combiners weren't standing in a standard pose, you were basically f***ed. But I'd argue, the most important factor of all, people forget you really needed upgrade kits to complete them. Back in Combiner Wars, you'd at minimum require a new feat on most releases. I'm not saying these figures are bad, or that the new combiners will absolutely be good, but given the history beforehand, maybe these new combiners were actually justified after all. Bring on Age of the Primes, baby! But why are they reissuing these two? Isn't it wasting a slot of an existing figure? No, they're reissuing them because they're awesome. Time to Turn, Topspin, and Siege Spinister were both some of the best toys of their lines. And both were, coincidentally, some of the most difficult general release figures to come by. I'm honestly a little disappointed I was never able to properly talk about Spinister in the War for Cybertron rankings video. Such a stylish release with a hella clean robot mode. From the hard yet confused face sculpt to the gaudy colors, he perfectly replicates the accidental hard ass who will wreck your shit, but have no clue how he did it afterwards. I just love how the legs mimic the box art with the double cockpits. It's equal parts awesome and hilarious. I've seen complaints that it's accurate to a fault, but given how it inspires the engineering to go above and beyond, it's the kind of accuracy I end up really liking. And sure, the original doesn't come with any Target Masters, but honestly, I don't think he needs to. The main figure is just great on his own. Though the reissue is coming with new ones, albeit these two fuckers again. The transformation is buttery smooth, though remember to angle the thigh like this to ensure the cockpit sits flush. And the helicopter mode is super compact and awesomely 80s. And Topspin, well, he's always been great. Clocking in at third ranking of the best Time to Turn molds, he's always been a blast to flip back and forth. Maybe by modern standards is a little hollow in areas, but for the time he pushed the deluxe price point chunkiness to its absolute limits. He's the kind of massive deluxe you don't often see anymore. It's all shrunken down Voyagers or compact engineering. Those are also great, but there's a special quality to Topspin we don't see anymore. The engineering is extremely satisfying, twisting and turning in a level that almost reaches the heights of Trigger Happy. Pretty damn close and still awesome. And despite being the least aerodynamic jet ever, he's such a vibe as a flying box of doom. Twin Twist might be the better mold of the two deco-wise, but Topspin definitely has the colors, although I suppose in the upcoming luscious Diaclone stylings, it won't particularly matter anyway. These two are probably some of the best Generations Deluxes Hasbro has ever done, and honestly, it's pretty damn cool that they're coming back for new fans, being 6 and 8 years old respectively. Plus, you know, they won't cost Commander price, which is a plus. You know, it's funny, after you collect for a while, you kind of realize why you like the things you like, and why you don't the things you don't. For a while, I thought I wasn't particularly a fan of non-transforming Transformers. But then I built some brick sets and then much later blockies, and I realized that wasn't necessarily the case. But I still don't like most cases, even though these are really fun. Why is that? I think the recent Action Edition Megatron put into perspective why. It's a connection with the figure itself, not the character, but rather the experience. With a normal Transformer, I engage with the conversion, but with blockies, it's the build. This thing is fantastic, don't get me wrong, but I think the biggest thing for me is that I built it. I was there when it was put together piece by piece. I can't pick this up without remembering the process of assembly. It's the same reason why I'm sort of okay with Gunpla, but a lot of other standalone figures, not so much. It's just interesting that my opinion doesn't change over time, but instead recontextualizes itself. Probably helps that this is one of the best non-transforming Megatrons on the market. Full silver and red zones in the legs should be a staple. Miss me with that toon sh**. This is where it's at. I've been receiving a bit of ire lately for some of my preferences in regards to collecting third-party legends. And it's alright, people love to stick to their favourites, as I do mine. As such, I thought I'd clarify why I mostly prefer NewAge over Magic Square. It really boils down to what I desire in a Transformer. While I enjoy many aspects, one thing I always go for is the tactile experience. Transformers are, in essence, a puzzle as well as a robot and vehicle, so if something feels lacking, it's not going to appeal to me as much. Magic Square has always been marred by two key issues: softer gummy plastic and extremely overcomplicated engineering. This does allow their figures to be significantly more accurate, but I don't see it as a worthy trade-off when they lose their fun factor as a result. not. They're toys. Fundamentally, they are meant to be played with. Conversely, NewAge, more often than not, offers really engaging and fun conversions. And they always feel rock solid. Plus, they often have better paintwork and far more expressive sculpts. Now, that's not to say there aren't Magic Square figures I adore. My favorite combiner ever was produced by them, after all. And there are plenty of times where I feel they outclass NewAge. But for the most part, I genuinely think I'm in safer hands sticking to NewAge. As someone who's been collecting third-party Legends figures for a long-ass time, I've found my niche, and I absolutely feel comfortable with my collecting decisions.